Hi there, guys. Welcome to Junior Golf Guys and our 5 common questions for parents video series. My name's Tom and I'm joined by Phil. And today we are going to talk about the question, what sort of parent are you? So quite an interesting topic, this one, Phil. If you get the screen share up there, and we've just got a list here of actually 5 themes of parent. So I'm just having a look at this list. And the first one, just as it loads up here, is there we go. So the first parent we have here is the uninterested parent. So what is this? This might be the parent that doesn't really play golf, doesn't really have much of an idea about golf, might drop the child off at the driving range, go do a bit of shopping, pick up the child an hour later, and generally quite a hands-off parent, okay? Number 2, we've got the overcritical parent. So this could be a golfer or a non-golfer. But this would be the parent that is always very critical, questioning quite a lot, in the face of the child, if we phrase it that way. Number 3 on the list there. So I think we could probably all relate to this one, yelling from the sidelines. You probably get this a little bit more in football, but I regret to tell you I've seen a few parents like this in golf who maybe, let's say, walking around with the child in a tournament and getting in the ear of that child and trying to give some advice and shouting from a distance. Number 4, parent who coaches. This is this is another popular one, I would say. So this is the parent who will stand there at the driving range, on the course, wherever it is. They'll be giving the advice, left arm straight, head down, all that sort of jazz. And then number 5, the over-concerned parent. So this one might be the one who is actually thinking about withdrawing their child from the sport because of any particular concerns they may have. So positives, negatives, we don't know. So Phil, what's your initial thoughts on that here, and what sort of parents are you?
Well, look, I think that we're maybe missing one off there as well, and I think sort of like we've tended to focus on these ones as negatives, or sort of like overcritical parents who coach and stuff like that. But there are some parents that, well, 90% of parents that are fantastic with their kids' development as well, which we've maybe shied away from a little bit, or that the National Sports Survey have sort of shied away from in their sort of findings as well. So for me, I don't think this should necessarily all be negative. I think that we should have some form of education of what people do right and what are best practices for it as well. And, you know, sort of like all of these, like, I mean, geez, I have 112 kids coming through a week. You have 150 kids coming through a week. You see the whole range of it, right? And I suppose each parent sort of goes through this cycle. They probably go through a few of these at some point throughout their child's development. And, you know, like for me, it becomes the coach's sort of job to sort of help that parent understand what's being helpful, what's not being helpful. But it's a really hard conversation, isn't it? Because it cuts quite close to the bone discussing how you communicate with your child and how much support you actually give your child as well. Because I mean, like I've sort of learned over the years that sometimes just standing back and just letting parents say, like, yell from the sidelines is definitely not the right thing to do. But then actually discussing that subject with a parent can be quite a confrontational thing as well. I had there was a nice analogy that someone spoke to us about the other week, wasn't there, Tom? Richard Shorter, and he sort of suggested that if your accountant sort of said to you, you've done your sums wrong in your financials for that year, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, he just knows what he's talking about. But if someone tells you, actually, you're talking to your child wrong, it kind of hits home a little bit and can be quite a nasty thing to hear, I think. So we've got to be very careful about how we go about that with parents. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's always a fine line. And ultimately, you know, we're talking to parents right now in this video, and you know, we're not here to bring up your children. You know, you are the parent. It's your child, obviously. But our job, you know, is to hopefully just try and help you a little bit. And through our knowledge and our education and our experience, we're just here really to try and help you provide the best the best environment for your child. An environment where they can thrive. And I think really just looking at those lists there, you're right, they are all quite negative. And this is not about saying you are the overcritical parent, you are yelling too much from the sidelines. I think what this is actually about is actually just helping us and parents take a step back and think, hang on a minute, was that me 2 weeks ago? Was that what I was doing? And actually sometimes we just get caught up in life, and we don't often get that time to sit back and reflect and think about what we're doing. And I think that's really the point of this video is to actually just allow parents to step back and actually just look at a few different things and ask themselves a couple of questions and think, you know what, I was really trying to help my little lad, but that probably wasn't the right thing to do. And it's interesting, I've had conversations with parents over the years, and there's one particular parent now, and his child's 20, and I was helping his son out when he was only 14, and he even looks back now, and we laugh about it, over text messages. He'll say, oh, I can't believe what I used to do, looking back now, I can't believe I was so intense. And I think a lot of parents, let's say if there was a particular parent that was a yeller from the sidelines, I think in time they would look back and think, blimey, what was I doing? I felt that was the right thing at the time, but I'm looking back now and that really wasn't the right thing to do. And hopefully this just gets in a little earlier to a few parents that actually X, Y, or Z might not be the best way to help your child. We know that your child's interest is at the heart of everything you do, but there's certain ways we can encourage it.
And it's what influence you have on that child's memory of the sport as well. I mean, like I remember being an under-8 footballer and my manager, Brian Vincent, having a full-on fight with one of the mums on the sideline, like because he was swearing too much at her child. And it's like, that stood in my mind, that stuck in my mind, that influence sort of like that one scenario had, rather than the actual match and the enjoyment of the game and that. And it was a very negative thing for me as a child, just wanting to be in goal and play football. Whereas actually sort of like what their angle was very different from what ours was. Whereas children, to actually just play the sport and to turn up and enjoy ourselves and be with our friends and that. And some of the stuff that we talked about in the first sort of video about why kids actually enjoy it can often be very, very different to why parents enjoy it. And I think that we've got to be sort of aware of that as well, and be that you guys are the role models for your children, and you've got such an influence over their whole development that it's kind of important that you do some education on it as well, and that you do self-reflect and you sort of critique how you've been sort of watching your child go round. Are you giving them actually sort of a bit of empowerment over their own development? Are you asking them the right questions? Are you putting your arm around them on the drive home if they haven't won a competition and stuff? Or are you actually that person that's sort of being overly critical of them? Are you uninterested in just driving them to and from just to have an hour off them, sort of thing? I think it's a really useful thing to be able to do, to actually just reflect back on yourself.
Yeah, totally. And I think, hopefully if we just go through a couple of examples of things that we might see very often. And one of my, one of my pet peeves, let's say, is I often see a lot of children and they might be on the driving range, on the golf course, wherever it is, mum and dad. And almost whenever they hit a shot, the first reaction would be to look back to dad or mum, whoever it is. And it's almost like if it's a good shot, they're almost looking for a little bit of, praise. Oh, did you see that one, dad? That was a good shot. But then if it's a bad shot, it's almost like they're looking back in fear, like, oh, did you see that? Oh, what's he going to say to me? And it's that constant eyeballing of looking back. And I really, I don't like to see that, because I'd like to think that kids can just play with freedom. They can play with freedom. They can express themselves. They can play without fear. They're not worried about hitting a bad shot, because dad's not going to say anything to them. He's not going to tut his head. He's not going to shrug his shoulders. He's not going to tell him he lifted his head, and also they don't just have to feed off praise, so it's not an environment where it's quite a vicious cycle where they're just looking for praise and afraid of actually getting told off, let's say. So, that's particularly one situation that I don't like. I'd like to think that kids can just go out there, play, have the odd look at dad and, all right, pal, how you doing? Thumbs up. Yeah, all right, buddy, crack on. And then after the round, we talked about in the first video about the car journey home, how good would it be if the child could just get into that car and just not be afraid of the chat, whether they've had a good round or a bad round, and just have a really friendly chat. It might be completely nothing to do with golf. It might be, right, come on, we're going to Morrison's for breakfast, right, bish bash bosh, let's go. We're not going to talk about the golf. Or it might be, how did you get on out there today, son? What was the best shot? How did you feel? Do you feel like you could have improved on much? And actually have quite a constructive conversation with that child, rather than it being that intense scenario. And ultimately, however old that child is, whether they're 6, 7, 15, 16, you would like to think they're trying to hit a good shot. They're not trying to hit a bad shot. If they hit a bad shot, they know they've hit a bad shot. They don't need you to tell them that they've hit that bad shot. What they actually need is maybe a little bit of encouragement towards the next shot. So it's interesting, because looking at that uninterested parent there, I often see sometimes the ones that are like less interested, that's actually sometimes beneficial for the child, because they're just left to go along on their own devices and just go and play. Whereas the ones that sometimes play golf themselves, however, that can be a massive bonus because they understand the game. Sometimes that can actually be a huge disadvantage, because they play golf themselves and they expect so much more of their child, because they're a little bit older, they're a little bit better. They expect the child to be able to do the same. I can't understand why that child's hit a bad shot. Why have they done that? Well, actually, if you play golf, you should be able to understand how easy it is to hit a bad shot. So, it's a tricky one. And I think just another situation to just mention here is that classic parent who coaches. I hate to see the one just constantly stood behind the bay, wherever it may be, looking down at the child, advice after every shot. What I actually say is, as you said, Phil, the parent is often the role model for the child. So for me, if a parent was going to the driving range with their child, I'd rather see the parent hitting balls. And actually, guess what? Let's just play a game. Here, mate, let's have a little nearest the pin competition, closest to that cone, whatever it is, and just actually take part in that session with the child. I guarantee that is more fun for the kid, whatever standard they're at, if they're playing against dad in a bit of friendly competition, or mum, rather than just looking back every time thinking, oh, what have I done? Oh, more information. It can be quite nasty sometimes, I think.
Massively. I think that's really important, that parents, I think you set yourselves up for such a positive influence if you can actually become their practice buddy. If you can be the sort of like, if you can relate to what they're talking about when they do get frustrated with something, if you're frustrated with something as well, if let's say that we know that their grip's got to change and their coach has said, look, you know what, that's a little bit strong, you can sort of play that game and help the coach make that change by saying, okay, well, we're going to try and have a little competition. We've got to get them closest to that 50-yard marker, but we're going to try and do it with our hands crossed. Then we're going to do it the other way. Then we're going to do it this way. And then we're going to do it that way. And start to sort of open their mind a little bit to being coachable, to being sort of okay with making mistakes and getting it wrong, rather than just telling them that they're getting it wrong all the time and then becoming a little bit scared. And it's something that I massively see it in the first lesson with parents, when sort of we don't necessarily know what their relationship's like. When you start to ask the child a question and the parent starts to answer it straight away, or like you see that child look to their parent for that answer straight away, and it sort of shows you maybe that the child's maybe they can be a little bit scared in the first lesson and just not that confident to actually communicate with you. But it could also be that parent's got such a driving influence on that child's sort of development that they're almost scared a little bit to put their own opinion over.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And, particularly in young children, there might be an element of, they're a little bit shy, and they don't really have their own voice quite yet, and they sort of look to mum or dad, and then they're looking for the answer for them. But I understand how that happens, but really, we want the child to have their own voice, don't we? And ultimately, whatever answer that child gives back, that's not a reflection on the child, that's not a reflection on the parent. They might give back this answer that, it might be a wrong answer, let's say, but that doesn't matter, and I think there's sometimes probably that, that protective shield around the child from the parent, that they almost don't want the child to give a wrong answer or to give a stupid answer, because that's only natural for a parent. They want their child to, do as good as possible, let's say. But ultimately, we don't care. Whatever that little child says back to us, that's great. They've answered. We're talking. We're building that relationship, as we talked about before. And I think sometimes it's just about stepping back, isn't it? And just trying to see it through the child's eyes. And actually, it's patience. Patience is a massive thing, I think. And I think probably the impatience is where sometimes some of the actions come from. Parents are getting a little bit too intense and a bit too involved because they're expecting so much and they're impatient. They want the result right there and right now. And I'm telling you now,
doesn't it? Like once that child does start to feel pressure, not just internally, because golf's scary enough, right? Like standing on the first tee of a competition, like there's enough pressure on you, but they're now almost having that pressure of, well, dad's watching me as well, and dad expects me to do well because he's paying for my golf lessons, and he's the one driving me to the driving range 3 times a week and stuff like that. That's kind of not the way that it should be, right? We should want this almost, dad's there to support me. Like he's not thinking about the money and that he spent on it. He just wants me to enjoy myself and to have a good time. And sort of, I know that whether I play good or whether I play bad, he's still going to love me at the end of it. He's still going to have it. He's still going to take me to Morrison's for our little weekly breakfast sort of thing. And he's still going to have his arm around me rather than being silent on the drive home and sort of like telling your mum that you was rubbish today or something like that. And, that's more the experience that unfortunately a lot of children have, is that if they don't perform well, then unfortunately that is a nasty drive home sometimes.
Yeah, that probably is an unfortunate truth, but we've just got to see the bigger picture, haven't we? Your child, particularly at the age of 10, 11 or younger, whatever they do on that given day, that does not define them as a child. It doesn't define you as a parent. It doesn't define us as golf coaches. If they have a bad day, they've had a bad day. It just doesn't matter. If it's a 25-year-old kid who's playing in a major tournament and he messes up, all right, it maybe matters a little bit more. Okay, potentially not, but potentially it does if he's just cost himself $500,000. But for your 10-year-old kid who's just had a bad day, it really doesn't matter. And I think how we as parents and coaches react to that is fundamental in how long the child can stay in the game. Like I said, they can't be afraid of failure. They've got to be able to embrace the failure. They shouldn't be afraid of chatting to dad afterwards if they've had a bad round. It should be about, okay, son, you've had a bad day, no worries, let's move on. Next week we'll try and do better. All the sort of, it's not rocket science, is it? It's just positive mental attitude, encouragement, support, as opposed to too much criticism. I'll tell you what, Phil, let's flip it over to the next slide. I think we've got, what do we have on there? Yeah, so 5 top tips for parents. Do you want to run through a couple of those, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of, we'll try and give a few examples on each one, maybe, Tom. So first one, being supportive of your child. So, I mean, like, as we sort of said, that uninterested parent almost is our ideal parent, but actually sort of like, if you can, I think that we say that more because sort of like that they're not overbearing on the child. If we can have that parent that's not overbearing and supportive, that is actually there, they are on the sidelines and they are like still cheering their child on, whether they do good or bad. That's great. That's what the child wants to know. They want to know at the end of the day, if they play good or bad, it doesn't matter. My parents still going to love me, right? They're still like, that's not going to create an awkward atmosphere, whether it was good or bad. They're going to be there for me. And that's the environment that we want to try and create. to be a role model, yeah, I mean, like, I suppose my old football coach, like if I was using him as my role model, that's pretty poor environment, or pretty poor example to be setting for a team of under 10 footballers, sort of thing. But you know what? If sort of like the role models, okay, well, we're going to get to the golf course a little bit early. We're going to make sure that we sign in. We're going to make sure that we know everybody. Going to shake hands with the other parents. We're going to be nice to everyone. Like, that's the kind of role model that we want. Yeah, that's sort of being really constructive in, like, you know what, these are the rules and etiquette of golf. These are sort of like some of the positive things that golf does actually give us. But equally, it's that it does separate us a little bit as well, whether you play that good or bad, that you are sort of shaking hands with each other. You're still congratulating each other on good and bad shots. You're helping people look for their golf balls. That you can really set a really positive role model for the rest of that child's life by sort of demonstrating some of these core values that actually golf gives us the opportunity of doing. Letting the children learn from their mistakes, as you sort of said, like on that driving range, that overcritical parent always wanting to say, concentrate or keep your head down or your left arm bent on that one, sort of thing. You kind of don't let that child self-explore about what makes that sort of work for them and what doesn't work for them. And I think that's one of the things, like a parent might say, keep your head down, but I could probably give you 100 examples out on tour of people where people don't keep their head down. And then it's like, okay, but then that professional that's managed to do that, like Dustin Johnson or Annika Sorenstam or David Duval, where they actually let their head rotate through it. So at some point, they haven't had an overbearing parent or an overbearing coach on them. Sort of like they've been able to make their own mistakes. They've been able to find their own way. And you know what? It's not always a mistake. So just having
I think the old head down one, it's in children's golf, it's adults golf, you know, keep the head down, don't lift your head. It's an absolute classic. And if there's one thing that I want to leave this planet and leave behind, it would be nobody ever says, keep your head down. You know, it's such a bad tip. It really is, you know, but well, it's littered with it, you know, and I think that's, look,
it's driven from the right place, right? It's people
that
they're giving someone some help. But unfortunately, most parents don't have a clue. Like, unfortunately, from a technical standpoint, you don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on with ground reaction forces. You don't know what's happening to sort of like why that child should be doing that. And if you can't explain it, you're better off saying nothing than giving them the wrong information.
Yeah, look, I've spoke to parents before, and sort of one of my, you know, the biggest advice I give to all parents is, look, find a coach that you trust. You know, find somebody that you trust who you can, you know, hand over your child's development to, you know. And it's you know, unfortunately, you know, parents, a lot of them, however much they mean well, they're unfortunately not golf coaches. You know, they might have a little bit of an idea, but you know, junior development and golf development as a whole, it's multifaceted. There's so much to it that actually just the odd tip here and there, it could be completely sending a child down the wrong avenue. We've seen it with club golfers, you know, giving their adult friends at the weekend.
The best pros in the world.
Yeah, you know, they've seen it on YouTube and stuff like that. But you know, you've got to find someone you trust, and finding that coach that you can trust is massive. And finding that golf club, that academy, whatever it is, find the right place for your child and leave them to it. And I think just, you know, jumping on now to number 4 and seeing the bigger picture, you know, that's a big thing, isn't it? We alluded to it before, you know, that isolated result on, you know, last Sunday, whatever it is, it doesn't define your child. It doesn't mean that your child is any worse than they were the week before. If, you know, if they've done 10 shots more, they haven't suddenly lost the ability to swing and hit. They've just had a bad day, you know, just like Rory has bad days, you know, just like Tiger has bad days. Everyone has bad days. So actually, let's try and focus on long-term development rather than short-term success. Let's not let
Tom, sorry to jump in there. Like, we probably saw this quite a lot when we used to go through gradings, right? That it was almost success or failure. Like you pass your grading or you don't pass your grading. But it was one of the hardest things that we ever had to do was fail a child, yeah. But it was also one of the best learning opportunities that we gave that child and gave that family about how to actually support that child once they get down, and sort of like to actually, I remember that we used to sort of say, like, your only failure would be if that you didn't learn from that mistake and try and come back again stronger. Like, actually sort of break it down, like, why didn't it go your way that day, and how could we influence that going forward, you know? And I think that's a nice thing that parents can actually do. Like, it's not necessarily a good or but like, look, every golf competition they're going to play in, they're not always going to come first, so they're probably going to be disappointed at some point. But if we've got that big picture in our mind of, okay, well, you know what, you really represented like yourself really well around there, like you really tried your hardest, or actually I don't think that you did try your hardest at that point. Like, sometimes you can give them a few home truths with it, and so these sort of reflection, this time to reflect, is a really good thing. But ultimately, knowing this big picture is, you know what, I'm more concerned about creating a good human being than I am creating a really good golfer at first.
Yeah, sure. It's seeing that, that bigger picture of creating, well-mannered, nice, polite children. It's not all about ramming golf down the throat. And just moving on to that last one there of don't compare your child to others. We spoke about this in video 1, and I think the classic one of this is distance, isn't it? If you might have 2 8-year-olds, and get this, one 8-year-old might actually be 2 years biologically behind, let's say. So actually it might be an 8-year-old in a 6-year-old's body. There might be another 8-year-old who is 2 years biologically ahead. So actually you've got the 8-year-old who's actually got a 10-year-old's body. So all of a sudden you've got 2 8-year-olds who are actually physically, biologically 4 years apart. There's going to be a difference in power, speed. There's going to be a difference in how far that ball goes. And it's often unfair to compare your children at a young age to others. It's classic in rugby, isn't it? If there's a big guy in rugby, he barges past them all and scores the try. That doesn't particularly mean he's any better than others, but if he's bigger and stronger, he's going to do it, and I think that's important. And if we just nip over to the next one, Phil,
Yeah.
the next slide, just as a little bit of a summary on this area. I love this. This quote here: the greatest gift you can give your child is a chance to be free and express themselves. And I think that is massive. Can you allow your child to just go and play golf, go and enjoy, express themselves with no fear, play with a smile on the face? I don't think any parent could argue with that. I think all parents would agree with that statement. I'm going to put it out there and say, I reckon they'll all agree. Well, I tell you what, if you agree with that, let's just work together and encourage that and allow that to happen as much as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a nice way to leave it there, Tom. And my biggest advice would be become their practice buddy, show them that you care, be there for them. And as you say, sort of like, we're trying to nurture the whole human being rather than just the golfer with it. So see the big picture.
Absolutely. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that chat. Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.